Thank you for joining us today on 10 Minutes with the Artist, an episodic series that explores the art practice and the personal vision that guides artists. On today's episode, we're very proud to have Diedrich Harms, who is completing his thesis in architecture at North Dakota State University. We invited him today to speak about his research and the completion of artifacts in preparation for his defense. Diedrich's work examines recovery through an analysis of addiction. His work is composed of broken vessels that appear to be searching for wholeness and purpose. His work touches on issues of absence, decision, reaction, and time during a process that is very much about healing and acceptance. I'm Anthony Ferris, and this is 10 Minutes with the Artist. Diedrich, thank you so very much for joining us today on 10 Minutes with the Artist. In your piece, shape seems to be sort of transitory, and nothing is particularly lost. It's just sort of recontextualized or shifted in some way. So I was wondering if you could talk about how that fits in with your concept.
I think it's a pretty apt relationship to what I'm trying to do in my architecture. It's an addiction treatment center, so it's trying to recombine elements of past self, both like your physical state, your history, your decisions, and then taking those in a building itself that is recombined. It's an abandoned hospital in Montana, taking the parts, recombining them, using them in a different way. It plays along in the artifact, but it's also a relationship of how even the destroyed and the broken and the cracks still have their capacity to do things and combine to make something not better, different. And then there's a beauty in that. The piece is crumbling and rolling down. The vessel can no longer be used as a vessel, but it's something completely new that's created. That's I would say still has a purpose and a utility to it, even though the original function of the cup is inherently lost when you destroy it.
Is there an extent, like a range here between something that is more useful and something that's almost not or not at all?
I think the definition of use is a little tricky, but when trying to embody the individual, it's everything that has built them up to that moment. Every decision has a purpose and has a use in one's history, and that needs to be recognized. It's in addiction treatment, you're trying to heal the whole. So you have to address issues of the past, think about the future, and not even in your addiction, just other personal decisions made. Those have to be addressed and approached. So yeah, back to the artifact, I think it's the combination of the different pieces. They may not every one may sit perfectly. A lot of them sit precariously, but it's the combination of the precariousness and the dust and the grit and the little pieces of paper that are stuck in it. It helps form the shape that it is.
Okay. How does the element of time sort of play into this idea and this concept?
One of the bigger elements when it comes to time I saw was the paper it laid on. It relates immediately to the past and the present. It shows the scars that were used to destroy the cups. It's crisp white paper, very little markings on it other than the giant voids and damage from where the cups had been hit by a hammer repeatedly broken down. And then all of that, every cup that was destroyed, it's laid out on it like a scroll, and on one end it hasn't been beaten yet. So there's still a future, there's still something there, or that could be the beginning of a story and how it changed. So you can look at the paper as a canvas and also as the scroll that tells the story, and that's both ways. And you can also look at the voids and the damages, maybe somebody's history in using substances, but also maybe the difficult road to recovery. It was the breaking of it that allowed the cups to become what they are now. So having the path there, it plays a duality, both a hard side, looking backwards, and the optimistic side, yet also a very hard road looking forward.
Yeah. There is a very dramatic sort of feeling of violence within the work. And I was wondering if it spoke to addiction, or if it spoke to treatment, or if it spoke to sort of something else.
I think the violence, kind of the aggressive tones, was not really desired when I made it. I'm not trying to create an aggressive setting or anything like that, but I think it's an approach that needs to recognize that there is aggression and violence in the problem. It's not. I mean, some aggressive acts don't need to happen to somebody while they're an addict, but it takes a lot from somebody, and that itself is aggressive, and then it takes a lot to get out of a setting like that, a capacity like that. So you really have to face that aggression, even though it isn't always immediately aggressive. It's a lot of work and effort and hard times and sacrifice to get out of it. So it plays both roles there, and I think creating something that sits very quietly, smoothly. I mean, it's not very dynamic. You look at it and there's a lot going on, but having it be so placid while it's sitting there, the paper is just settled, and the cups are laid just so, also kind of counters that aggression. You think of aggressiveness as acts, where having it laid out like that is inherently not an act, but it displays a history of an act.
Yeah, and just kind of curious, when you're talking about those acts, are you talking about something that's internal or external?
I think both. I think it plays on to each. The artifact itself, it's the act of breaking the cup, then also the act of placing it back together. It's the act of crumbling the pieces, but then also scooping them up and dusting them on the paper. Internal and external acts, I think, go hand in hand, especially while you're trying to work on something holistically. The outside affects the inside affects the outside, like sound mind and a sound body. I think actions can do the same way. Internal actions can alter your external world. Your external world can affect your internal self.
Okay. What role do viewers play in the work? Why are they important, if at all?
I think it's one of the goals of my project was to create empathy for addiction. It's something we kind of stigmatize as in the society. It's viewed as a matter of personal choice, and by revealing these broken, beautiful pieces of pottery, it kind of shows that it can happen to anything. One of them was a Christmas mug I bought at a thrift store, and one of them, multiple pieces are actually handmade pieces of pottery. It shows the viewer that there's a range in what can happen, who it can happen to. I think it's very important for the viewer and the audience to see it and get close. I think a lot of people have a tendency to lean in and try to get close to it without touching it. Now, some people would poke around and touch it, and there's nothing explicitly saying you can't, and some of them were poured out, showing the path of emptying oneself out again. But I think trying to get as close as possible and seeing the tiny fragments is important, just to create the whole out of the pieces. You can't really get that from a distance.
Yeah. So. At the end of the interview, we like to ask a couple questions about your creative practice. So I was wondering what time of day you feel like you're most creative?
Definitely the nights. I'm a night person. It's easier to stay up than to wake up early for me. And then after a certain period of time, I just get in the zone, and things just start happening and working really well. Not all the time. A lot of time it's quite contrary to that. I think when it's dark, the evening and nighttime it's dark and quiet. It allows me to really focus and think through things too.
Yeah. Do you listen to music or anything like that when you're making work?
This work, I listen to music primarily. When I design, I'll typically listen to music. Sometimes I'll listen to a podcast or something. This one was just a variety of music. It took a while to get where I was. So it was quite a range in the music I listened to. But sometimes when it can be silent when I work, it is nice to just work in the quiet. So all you hear is your hands doing whatever activity you're doing.
Yeah. Is there anything that you're reading right now?
This moment, I'm actually rereading a portion of Junkie by William Burroughs. It's kind of an anecdote. It's kind of autobiographical piece of him beginning his journey through heroin. He was a famous author who had done very wild writing and was a heroin addict for years and years, and it kind of gives his personal insight in the early 1950s on what the drug epidemic, how it should be treated. and sadly hasn't really been approached. I thought it was kind of applicable firsthand experience from 60 years ago. And then it's also interesting to see how he writes. Most of it was written when he was sober in between phases of using, but it's interesting to see how he would write about his time while he was on drugs, especially just hearing about it. It's very eerie, and a lot of the things in the cures from the time period were really not empathetic in any way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard to hear what they did 60 years ago and then contemplating what people are doing now,
Yeah.
that we're going to look back and say the same things.
Yeah. I guess my last question for you would be, what's next?
Thesis is due in 16 days, so I'm just cruising through that. Design is coming along pretty well. I'm pretty happy with what it'll be. It's the original hospital in the city of Butte, Montana, which was once one of the richest cities in the world. And the hospital's now been abandoned for about 40 years, so I think there's a lot of opportunities in the building and in the design to express some things. And I hope to just be proud of what I walk away with, and then have increased empathy for addiction and addicts in the United States and for my audience. So.
Cool. Well, thank you so very much. And I'd like to thank you all for your time and your interest in the professional practice and the creative explorations happening here at North Dakota State University. So thank you. And for everyone here at the Memorial Union Gallery, keep creative.